Alrighty. Yes, Pippa, it absolutely is a new screen that I made 10 minutes before we started stream today. Uh, with that, before we get going on all of this jazz, on this Friday in the evening, probably around 7 or 8 my time, which is mountain time, we will be having a hangout for patrons. We'll be playing Hearts of Iron 4. So if you want to get in on that, go join the Patreon. It's in the description box.
I'll be observing because I'm
He's
not
really bad
a
at Hearts of Iron.
player. Yeah, of Hearts and Iron, at Hearts and Iron. Hearts of Iron.
And really, it's Lucy's fault because I wasn't playing it. And then Lucy's like, "Could you teach me how to play Hearts of Iron?" I'm like, "Wait, now I'm playing Hearts of Iron again." Oops. So I've been losing time on that.
How is the Colombian mission going?
Oh, it went horribly because the United States decided they couldn't abide by a communist country being in South America, even more than they couldn't abide by Nazi Germany existing.
Oh wow! So you lost that campaign?
Oh, pretty handily. I let it play out. I let it play out. So what I did was I allied with the Soviet Union because I was trying to make things crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I am opposed to the Allies and the Soviets are allied with the Allies and we are opposed to each other, maybe things will work out for me. They didn't, because the Germany captured the Soviet Union, so that didn't go well. Only a couple of months after I finally succumbed to the Americans.
I really want to see someone play like Guatemala or some like tiny nation, like Central American nation, and I want to see someone win.
Ugh.
The Guatemalan, the United States is part of Greater Guatemala.
It is a slow start because
it's such a miserable thing what happened to certain countries like that.
Well, game mechanic wise,
I don't think you can really. Is that possible, even to win? To if you're the country like that, I don't think it's stacked in your favor. Even like the resources that you have in that game, you're not going to be able to.
You don't really have access. What you're concerned with is land versus factory slots. So I need X number of factory slots. I think X number of factory slots to do X number of things. And if you don't have a lot of slots to begin with, you don't get very far very fast. So like there's a limit to what is fun as far as small countries go.
Who here wants to see Daedalus play as Guatemala and live stream it?
There's a reason why he's not allowed to start polls.
You did Colombia, but that's a pretty big step up, actually. Like when I wanted you to do a small nation, I had in mind like Aruba or like
Luxembourg.
So Luxembourg, I mean, yeah. Luxembourg's interesting. I actually didn't realize like they have a military history.
They do. It's also conveniently titled The History of Ping Pong.
Yeah.
Back and forth between Germany and France.
The Greater Empire of San Marino.
Well, what I was trying to do was establish Gran Colombia.
I mean, realistically, Colombia does have the population size where they could expand. I mean, at that time, even.
Yes. Actually, apart from us doing horrible things to South America is kind of well situated. Massive population.
It's a massive population. It should be safe from us, but, it's kind of one of those things that, the modern age kind of prevents.
Speaking of being safe from us, let's get on to the theme of the evening. So a couple weeks ago, Hetman gave me an idea that he wanted to do of a book that he wanted to talk about on stream. And the book is, it's kind of frankly awful.
Mm-hmm.
It is a piece from a 90s militiaman from the militia movement. It
Named
is,
Thomas W. Cheatham,
yes, it is
and the name of the book,
178 pages long. Thanks for
the
that.
name, the name. You're welcome. The name of the book is Civil War II: The Coming Breakup of America, and it's it's interesting because Thomas Cheatham, he, as far as I understand, he was actually, I don't think he was a Green Beret, but he was a professional military man. And in the 90s, he volunteered as a mercenary and fought in Croatia, and I believe perhaps in Bosnia. I don't think he fought in Bosnia, but I know he fought in Croatia. And he came back to the United States. I mean, he already most likely had separatist, white separatist views um, prior to coming back, but he saw similar patterns in his mind um, here to what he saw in Yugoslavia. And the essential theme of this book is that multi-ethnic states or multi-confessional states are inherently unstable. Um, and that's basically the premise. That's the central point of his argument throughout the whole book.
I can't believe I forgot to check this. He has a Wikipedia page, actually.
He does, yeah.
He
It's
served
not. He's not.
in the United States Army in Vietnam as private first class. He also fought in the Rhodesian War.
There you go. Yep.
I wonder why he turned into a nutter. And the Croatian War of Independence as a mercenary. And Rhodesia was the, 70s, 60s, and 70s.
I have my own opinions of Rhodesia.
None of them are good for me.
But those are for a different show. My
Yes.
opinion is essentially there could have been a much better transition. And I think Mugabe proved to be even worse than what was in place.
Well, I
But
think broadly speaking about Africa, it's very rare that we see a happy story come out of Africa. For example, Niger at the moment is experiencing a coup, and everyone is except Russia seems and China seems to be opposed to Niger doing this. So that'll be an interesting thing to check out in the next couple of weeks. And by interesting, I mean
yeah, I
horrible.
noticed that. I just saw it. So anyway, yeah,
Yes.
that's the theme of his argument. Um, should we get on to maybe so he divides the book into sections. The north, the south, like the Dixie South, and then the southwest, the former territories of Greater Mexico. And his argument is that um this is actually, it's kind of a pretty stupid argument, but that the first states where this ethnic conflict will start, and this ethnic based civil war in the United States will start, is in the South, and he calls it the Reconquista of the
The
American
Mexican
South.
Reconquista of our Southwest is the name of the
What's
chapter
very
title.
interesting, is, and it's something that I have noticed, is there's population of Hispanic, Texans, New Mexicans, Californians who have been in that territory for a long time. Now, very few of them even speak Spanish, but overwhelmingly, these people are members of the Border Patrol. Actually, they compose a large percentage of the
Give me a second.
Let me see.
Someone got excited.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he divides this very racially, first of all.
Of course he does.
And it's predicated on it being a racial conflict, the entire book.
Of course. I want to flat out, I just want to state that one should never, especially looking at history, one should never say like this can't happen here. I'm of the belief that something like this could happen, but the likelihood of it happening, and especially happening in the way that he is predicting, is very, very slim, if it exists at all, to any degree.
Here's the thing, I think, and this kind of rolls into what has been being talked about broadly for the past couple of weeks in the internet. For most people, everyone goes about their day and they get along. And we have huge problems with systemic racism in America. That's undeniable. And structural racism. And anti-racist theory is an important thing to study. But I think we exaggerate some of those divisions personally. Because, I mean, you see time and time again that people don't want to fight their neighbors. It's not really the thing they want to do.
I can look back, for example, to the Civil War, the Russian Civil War in Ukraine, and you see that ethnic-based those conflicts emerge, and the people that take it on the nose, of course, are the most are Ukrainian Jews. But prior to that conflict, more or less, people got along quite well, with some, occasionally there would be, violence, but this violence was primarily politically driven. And that is, to me, I think, the biggest driving force in ethnic violence. It's not actually the inability of ethnic groups or even, confessional groups to necessarily coexist, but it's these groups, basically people in power, politicians, utilizing divisions like this to actually put forward their agenda and actually, meet their own political goals. That to me is the biggest danger. And the thing about sort of what I've noticed in maybe the last 10, 15 years is that there's a lot of this. You see people you see this exploitation of political loyalties, which is increasingly given a ethnic or racial bent, and to me that is a danger. People have to be cognizant of that.
Well,
And
and it's
said
not.
is true. What you said is true. There is systemic and structural racism in this country, but I do think that, and this is me actually a little bit hitting at the left here. I think that when this is overemphasized in the way that it is, that leads to nothing good. It doesn't lead to someone, creating an anti-racist or creating, a more aware community. When you are very self-righteous and zealous about it, it tends to lead to some backlash. And to me, that is very concerning. It goes both ways, though. I'm not just choosing to attack, far left narratives here.
One of the things I have noticed, invariably, is that racial narratives are very effective dividers.
Very much so.
And there are problems, and I have talked about some of them. There are certainly problems with narratives, but I think the key of this book in particular is that it is predicated on a fantasy. And like the whole reason, like you distinctly brought this up to me, was comparing it to how What If Altus presents his view on racial politics. This imagining of a disparate block of people, like even look at the first three chapters, or the chapters 3, 4, and 5, right?
Yeah.
Or 4, 5, and 6. I'm sorry. The Mexican Reconquista of our Southwest is like it's designed racially, and it's designed it evokes history, right, by using the term Reconquista.
Of course.
Go, Baba. No, go.
It doesn't actually.
Hang on a second. Okay, he's gone. Yeah, it's not.
He doesn't that much really analyze the history of former Yugoslavia. I mean, he uses. It's been a while actually since I read the whole thing. His whole 178-page book, but what I do remember is that he doesn't look into the historical background of former Yugoslavia. I think he does take it back maybe towards the Second World War, but he doesn't go any farther than that.
No,
And he also doesn't really analyze the reasons as to why Yugoslavia broke up, why there was this conflict in both Croatia and Bosnia. And it is predicated on a fantasy, you're right? And it's sort of like I think it's a fantasy. He tries to portray himself as someone who doesn't want that, but we all know that a lot of people who think about who write works such as this, it's kind of like, that nutty child who wants to like live through a zombie apocalypse. Like he's preparing for it. He's looking forward to this. When in reality, such a situation would be not ideal, to say the least. I mean, you're talking about a very, very bad situation. I always thought that there could be a conflict in this country, which would, by its nature, given our country's size and overall, the overall just proliferation of firearms and just explosives and things like this in this country. But I always thought that a troubles-like conflict could possibly emerge in the future. And if that were to happen here, if you look at, for example, the Troubles and its proportional impact on Northern Ireland, in total, we're talking about, it doesn't even reach the two-digit. Not the two-digit, but it doesn't even reach over 10,000 as far as, its death toll. It's around, maybe for the course of the 30 years that it lasted, to maybe 3,000 to 4,000, but that's not an insignificant amount of death for someplace that's small. If something proportionally similar were to happen here, it would be around in the tens of thousands of deaths.
So I think when we bear in mind about half of all weapons in private ownership are here in the United States. And this number of half of all weapons in private ownership grossly eclipses all the small arms in possession of militaries or of uh, police forces. So, like, understanding that the United States has a lot of guns, I don't think is necessarily going to be a precondition to a conflict, because having a lot of guns is not what you need to sustain a movement like that.
No, you don't need that.
Like,
It's not a
how do you feed people without turning into a roving band and then dealing with the problems that pertains to? There are a whole bunch of different problems that, like, these militia groups don't solve. But, like, I think the interesting thing here is, let's skip ahead a bit. I want to talk about how he uses quotes and incidents.
Mhm.
I'm going to read a passage and I'm going to omit certain things. And this is from the Apocalypse in the North chapter.
Mhm.
When some citizens sued the city over this withholding of police protection, city attorneys responded thusly in court. The plaintiffs simply had no constitutional or federal right to have the police respond to their calls for assistance or to receive police protection against potential harm caused by private parties. And he puts in a citation, sort of, kind of. This is a New York Times article in 1993, which I'll note that we as a society have talked about police not being required to protect people today.
Mhm.
And he uses this quote, this single point, to illustrate a complete collapse of law and order in urban societies, blaming this specifically on African Americans. And, like,
Is he referring? He's probably referring to, given the date of that
that,
citation. He's probably referring to the Rodney King
yeah,
riots, and there
1993
were,
is around the time of the Rodney King riots.
yeah, at that time actually. So what he's referring to is actually the the riots that when the riots reached the LA's Little Korea, or Korea, K Town, and the locals had to organize defense of their businesses. Um, there was no access. The police were not. That is true, actually. They at that time they weren't. The disorder was at such a scale, the police could not respond there, and they
Yeah,
weren't responding there. Part of it probably too was their own um, lack of willingness to do so. Because shit really got out of hand uh, in that riot. It really, um, there's a number of good documentaries on it. But essentially, some of these areas were on their own. Um, and the Korean shop owners hastily organized themselves. Many of these men, before it had, they came from ROK, South Korea, and were there, living there at a time where, especially like the men were 40 years or older, maybe older, they had some military experience, just because it was a nation, conscript nation. So, um, and they actually did do this. They even coordinated to a degree with communications, like walkie-talkies and stuff like that. Um, and we can't argue either that Koreatown, there was sort of a unique conflict, like inner conflict, in those riots between um, the predominantly African American and Latino area, and then also K Town. Koreans owned a lot of the grocery stores, the um, convenience stores in the area, and there was at times, ambivalent relationship between uh, these groups, and a lot of it had to do with sort of the economic structure of those neighborhoods. Um, but yeah, um, that did occur. I haven't, since in the almost 30 years since that happened. I can't think of a similar incident to that So he's using a very, and I mean, he wrote this in the mid 90s, so not long after this happened. But in the 30 years since then, and I'm not saying that race relations in the United States are harmonious by any means, but in the all of the incidents that we saw, since then, I haven't really. The only thing actually that I can say it happened during the George Floyd protests and disorders, whatever you want to call it. Actually, in Chicago's Little Village, there were so Little Village is for those who don't know, it's predominantly a Mexican neighborhood. It's actually become very economically it's kind of sort of like a now like a almost a little bit of a tourist trap. They have a lot of shops and
They have really
restaurants
good
there.
tacos.
Yeah, really good tacos, basically.
Uh,
And some of those areas, some of those businesses run on money that it's an open secret that are actually it's cartel money. Um, they didn't want their businesses to be disturbed, so they used their contacts within the local gangs, and there were cases where just random African Americans driving through there were shot at or beaten up during that time period. So, I mean, it does happen. But something to the scale of what happened in Los Angeles, I haven't seen. And it's not really a prominent feature of a lot of these riots and protests, whatever you want to call them. It hasn't been an extremely prominent feature. That isn't to say that something like that couldn't happen. And I believe that it certainly can, especially the more the media pushes
well, I,
the
I
racial of it.
I think reaching back to that, because that's not really the wild part I found in that particular bit.
Mm-hmm.
He starts talking about how this will, and it sounds very similar to what Faltis put in his Second American Civil War video, like to the point where I wonder if he didn't consult this book.
I'm sure. I kind of. That's
I doubt
why
he
I wanted
did,
to bring
but
this up.
still.
Yeah.
Like he talks about how the cities will be surrounded and sieged out, and how they are dependent on, and like he doesn't think about population density or dynamics and things, and he constructs like 5 different scenarios right after that in the preceding pages, various combinations of, well, if white people do this and black people do that, then this will happen, none of which points to a coherent narrative.
No. It's not.
And like
It's remarkably poorly constructed.
it's
And
masquerading as analysis.
yeah.
um
Um.
and like it's like a Weimar Germany fan fiction going forward at that point.
He So he uses examples, of what occurred in Croatia and Bosnia, of basically police departments or local army units splitting based on ethnic lines, taking some of the guns, the equipment. What he doesn't, I don't think he explored this really, but the vast majority of the JNA, the Yugoslav National Army, was Serb run from the get go. It was staffed with Serb officers, and the overwhelming bulk of them, of the equipment, was able to be, they were able to seize that on that basis alone.
The thing to keep in mind
There
about
is,
Yugoslavia in particular is that the conditions existed in the region for generations prior
it
to
did
this.
for generations, and particular, I mean, it did even without the Second World War, but the Second World War, largely the 90s conflict in Yugoslavia was a continuation. I wouldn't, not even necessarily continuation, but a byproduct of, it was sort of a ripple of what happened in World War II. And so far, you know, there isn't
Lay
a
down.
similar or
Lay down.
quite equivalent situation here. There is a
There isn't.
history of
And like,
racism, there is a history of slavery, oppression that exists in the United States, but nothing to the degree. And I'm sorry, I don't want to necessarily offend people, but nothing to the degree of what you see happen in Yugoslavia um, in the
well,
Second World War.
it's not necessarily a case of degrees. It's a case of how it's structured, right? To have a
Yeah,
situation, what he's talking about is the balkanization of the United States, and to
yeah,
have a situation that a balkanization exists, you have to have sectional lines being drawn,
yeah.
like ethnic lines. Like, and in the Balkans itself, you have by long ethnic lines, and Russia has this problem too, like that it could potentially occur because they play ethnic shuffle every couple hundred years. So, like,
They
you
do.
have to
Yeah.
create the circumstances that create these sectional conflicts in the first place. So it's telling that the first American Civil War is not a race issue. It's
No, it's not.
a political one.
Yeah.
Um,
Um.
he is imagining a system of
You,
division that makes racial lines political lines, as if there is a distinct difference between what you want for your family and what someone across the street might want because they have a different skin color. And that's not really the way things work, right? Because you have people who have all kinds of influences affecting how they see their political interests, not just racial ones. And to essentialize it to that category means that you're fundamentally failing at analysis in the first place, because you're missing all the other factors that goes into what people want and desire.
I would agree with you for the most part on that. I will say that a lot of those lines, there is somewhat, especially when you look at cities, there is a balkanization that occurs. Um, I don't think it's, politically driven at all. Um,
Well,
and
but it's
it's
economically
it's
driven in cities, isn't it?
it's economically driven, and
I
that's
think
something that
speaking
you do see here.
I think
Um,
speaking of Chicago in particular is a really good example, right?
that's what I
Chicago
mean. Yeah, I was gonna-
has a very distinct neighborhoods, and these neighborhoods typically have very distinct ethnic flavors a lot of the time,
they
uh,
do,
with some
but they change
exceptions.
over time. They
Yeah, they
change,
move.
they move. Yeah. Um,
They are not fixed, and with that, the concerns of the neighborhoods are oftentimes stay remarkably consistent. Um,
yeah.
like, for example, I lived in Lakeview East for close to 6 years. Lakeview East is hey drop car. Lakeview East is well, it's a good chunk of the area in Chicago known as Boys Town, and they have particular issues around gentrification, and they talk about those things, and like chain businesses squeezing out the old business and whatnot. The issues at play are local, not necessarily these grand racial.
No, they're not national. They're not even. Only occasionally are they locally political, and by that extension, you know, ethnic. Only on occasion, you do see that on occasion, but you know that really isn't for most of the neighborhoods in Chicago really the case. And I think there's sort of a universal um there's especially now I think in almost every neighborhood in Chicago, I think maybe all of them, I think people are definitely sick of the situation in the city
Well, they're
specific.
obviously sick of the situation. I think like
Yeah,
one of the things that drives me absolutely batty about people who talk about Chicago. Um, I'm gonna rant a little bit.
go
Batty
ahead.
that drives is people don't know how much the people who live in the neighborhoods of Chicago that are most affected by the violence work to end the violence, and they do it on a shoestring. Like, well, you go through a neighborhood and drive through it, and at the times when school is letting in and out, you'll see adults with nothing more than with nothing more than a big safety vest, orange and yellow safety vest, right? Walking back and forth, patrolling, trying to make sure that violence stays away from the kids, or that people stay, like drug dealers stay away from the kids as they're going back and forth to school. Like, you see protests all the time of gang violence in black neighborhoods. Like they are working so hard to address this problem, and they do it mostly on a shoestring in silence because we politicize it to the degree we do. So
that, and there's not a whole lot of resources
yeah,
to
like
fight it that are put there. There's also sort of a culture of silence that exists, and that's motivated largely due to the extreme violence that does exist there, and it becomes part of your psyche, living there. It becomes sort of part of the way that you operate. It was notoriously hard to fight the mafia, like the La Cosa Nostra, within the Italian neighborhoods in either New York or Chicago or wherever they manifest themselves, because that culture of omerta was there. And there's a real fear that exists, I think there.
and it's
I do think
a
that things can
justified
be
fear.
done. I believe that a soft approach on this is not working, and I believe they need to take a firmer hand when it comes to this, and it can be solved that way. But I mean,
I'm just waiting for chat to ask you what a firmer hand looks like, because I think
someone
they haven't
asking-
asked yet. I think policing is a failed enterprise almost entirely. I think policing in the United States is a goddamn joke. It is the equipping of people not mentally prepared to do a difficult job without the necessary resources as a band-aid. Yeah, Dropcar, I think that's absolutely something to bring up, is Chicago really isn't as violent as it's made out to be outside of Chicago. I lived there for 10 years. I experienced 2 incidents in my entire 10 years there. Both of those close to when I left, and both of those were unrelated to one another. And one of them was a radical right-wing Nazi who tried to accost me in the street. So,
that's kind of funny because you got pretty Aryan looks there.
yes, I
don't know why you
formerly
wanna
blonde-haired. Yeah, the problem with policing is that policing is done really poorly in America. The first thing we should do is take away all the police's guns. Just gone. They make them solve problems without reaching for guns. American police shoot a ridiculous number of American citizens, especially when you compare it to other countries.
But they're shot at a ridiculous amount of time.
Good.
It's not
Take
the
cover.
most dangerous job, but
Take cover. More to the point, you know, in 2019, the only police deaths from gunfire were from other police, in New York City. So,
I mean,
they're more of a danger to themselves than they are to each other.
I would agree that their training is for a lot of them, it's subpar. A lot of them mentally are not prepared. A lot of them get burnt out. It's kind of like being a social worker.
Well, it's almost, there's a significant amount of overlap between what social workers should be doing and what we should provide funding for them to do and what we send police in to do. Like, these are problems that require resources, not policing.
And I think that there's plenty of ways to handle someone, like the way that they teach police how to handle someone with a knife. There's plenty of ways to disarm someone with a knife without shooting them. They showed up usually in their training videos that someone covering the distance and being able to stab a person. I mean, and that's plausible. But there are many ways to handle it, and the main thing is keeping distance between yourself and that person. and I've seen how the British police do that. The issue is though is that there are a lot of people with guns. There's a lot of not just people but criminals with guns.
Which
And you're
other
not going to make
countries
some law that's going to disarm them.
no, but other
Um,
countries can solve that particular problem with a specially trained armed response force. The exact same way they work in
yeah,
most
but they're not
countries.
dealing with it at the volume and frequency. That's it's kind of like when you deal with, say, metropolitan London, there's far less people in a given year that you're going to deal with.
But they have
You
a
know,
much higher incidence of stabbings.
that is
Like,
true.
they still deal with deadly threats all the time.
Yeah.
There are ways around that, especially, and I know this is going to be an incredibly controversial take, especially with the advent of less than lethal systems like tasers, pepper spray. Like, if you've ever been around any kind of thing like tear gas or pepper spray, you're not thinking about fighting after you get hit by that. You're just screwed. Like,
No. Yeah, I've experienced pepper spray and
oh, have you now?
tested it on myself.
Why would you do
Uh,
never? Why would you do that?
I mean, like,
Did you not believe the label?
not directly, but yeah, it's not. It doesn't feel good. You're not. I mean, you can theoretically, someone pumped up on adrenaline can still be a threat, but they're not going to be able to really see after a while.
Yeah, but that threat, like, suppose it's someone on
I
PCP,
have seen
that threat exists
tasers.
irrespective of whether you have a gun or not. It's not like you shoot the guy with PCP and he suddenly remembers that he's human.
Yeah, I have seen tasers fail, but it's not very common that they do. As far as like fail to subdue someone.
Yeah, it's not enough to justify the system in place that exists now. It simply isn't. Oh, I was cleaning it, it went off on my face. That's exactly it, Pippa. Cleaning.
I was cleaning and it went off in my face. That's kind of a similar thing to what happened to me. It wasn't intentional. I also sprayed a dog once.
What? God damn it.
It was not a good dog. It was a stray that was very aggressive. And I didn't actually spray the dog. I sprayed above the dog and it ran away.
Yeah, that'll probably do it. That's fair.
You don't really need to spray a dog because their olfactory sense is so strong that if it's in the air, even they'll get a few particles and they'll be like, "That's fucking stupid. I don't want to be around that," and run away from it. That's another thing that police do. That I think I get angrier at them shooting dogs in this country than I do people. But
that sounds like a personal problem.
I don't like people all that much. I think dogs are much better, and I always feel sad for them. Sometimes with people, I do feel bad. I feel bad when especially when it's the wrong person. But when I see a video of a guy, and you can watch this online, like when you see a video of a guy holding a gun to some random old lady's head, and he gets shot in the face, and then while he's on the ground gets shot a bunch of times, I'm not going to feel that sorry for him. But when they shoot a dog, it doesn't matter what dog it is. It's just being a dog.
I say the lesson, Krav Maga lessons for all elderly ladies.
If that woman knew that, maybe she would have been out of that situation, but
not physically good idea.
Yeah. No. At that point, when someone's got a gun to your head, you don't want to fight in that way. But that's besides the point. The point is that no, you're right. Police are very militarized in this country, and it seems like only the thing that makes me laugh is I've been seeing through a mutual friend of ours, like the advertisements for the police explorers, and they know that they have to advertise it to be really cool. So they like set up all this like sniper training and like, give them
I know who you're
like
talking about.
AR-15s and stuff like that. And
In his
it's
defense,
ridiculous.
in his defense,
Yeah.
so back before, way back in the day when both of us were younger and sprier, I actually helped him out on a few of those drills. I know exactly you're talking about.
I'm not bashing our friend. I'm
To
just
be
I'm just
perfectly
like,
clear, he had a much better grasp of the limits of policing than most police officers did, and I honestly think what happened to him was a shame.
no, for sure.
Uh,
That is a shame.
because he had a much better handle on gently policing a population than most people do.
Yeah, that's and it's a tragedy what happened. But I'm just going off.
And like the entire thing of his life afterwards, of like this side hustle to make a living type thing, is rough.
Yeah. The but that's not the measure of success actually.
No, it isn't. But
Very happy and successful.
there's a level of comfort that you want for your family when you're raising kids, right? And
For sure. For sure.
I just hope they make it. That's all.
Yeah. Regarding though, I'm not addressing the person as much though is the and we both of us we were in ROTC, and like I would have loved in
Hang on.
ROTC if they had like a mock pararescue thing or like a combat controller. That would be really awesome. But they didn't do that for us.
Air
But
Force
they
didn't do that
mock
much.
SWAT for the police explorers. And I'm not bashing them, but I'm just like, when I watch that, I'm like, dude, I mean, for a kid, I'd love to do that, but like, you don't want to train kids in that crap.
They do more.
That's for adults.
There's a much. I noticed when talking with certain people when I went on a senior ROTC in college. We're talking to cadets who came from junior ROTC from the Army, specifically. There's a lot more coherency between what you do in JROTC for the Army program and what you end up doing in senior ROTC, training wise, than there is in the Air Force, where they turn around and start actually training you in the college. And you sort of this also might have been a artifact of the age of our primary instructor and the fact that he showed movies all the time. But,
Oh yeah, I missed that. I missed that, man.
yes, he is. Did you get the note from a couple months back?
No.
The colonel passed away.
I didn't know that.
Yes.
This is really terrible news.
Yeah, he passed away about 7-8 months ago.
Was he sick?
Well, he was positively ancient by that time.
I didn't even know how old he was. I knew he was older, but I didn't think he was.
Let me see if I can't find a picture. I don't know if there is a picture of you and me in high school ROTC. Maybe there is. I'm not sure.
Those were some. I every once in a while I get very nostalgic for those days, and that is to the viewers. Although most of our viewers are adults.
They already know we're nerds. It's okay.
Yeah. If you ever want to do something fun, do ROTC because it's I enjoyed it a lot. I mean, I actually wish in my last I would have been more involved with it. That's my only high school regret is that I didn't do as more with it.
Anyway, this book too. Let's get to that because I want to talk about more of the book. You open up to our military bases fall to siege chapter.
Let's see. Military bases.
I don't think I have one of you and I in high school in ROTC.
Shame on you. I
That's
don't
your
think I have
fault
a
for not showing
picture.
up at things.
That's true. That's true. Our military bases fall to siege. The Siegfried Line, is a monument to human
I
stupidity.
love the quotes he picks throughout this entire book. They like have nothing to do with.
I know. I was just going to say that really doesn't have a lot in common.
He just picks random quotes that he thinks are badass and sprinkles them at the beginning of each chapter.
Yeah. Why couldn't have Thomas Cheatham died instead of the Colonel?
That's something you need to take up with your god.
Yeah.
The
Yeah, I'm
instinctive
gonna have to have a talk with him.
need for a member of a closely knit group fighting for common ideals may grow so strong because it becomes inessential what those ideals are. Urban street gangs, like he doesn't understand gangs to begin with. There's a great quote, I think, if you watch The West Wing, the TV show The West Wing. There's an episode. It occurs right after season 2 ends and season 3 begins, and it's a kind of special play they put on to kind of address the stuff after. And they talk about a large number of things, and some of it's bullshit. The episode in question is called Isaac and Ishmael. Some of it's bullcrap, but one of the characters comes out and talks about the concept of identity inside a gang, and that people who are in gangs aren't ashamed of it because it gives them a sense of belonging. Like, that quote kind of ignores the concept that people justify doing things on behalf of those who they feel accept them, and it becomes acceptable to do.
That's true. And the thing is that the structure of gangs, of street gangs, has really changed a lot.
Oh, from the 90s to now, absolutely.
Who was writing this? There were much bigger groups and they had more structure. Now, the situation that you have, at least in Chicago,
no, it's countrywide.
Basically, like each little block has a clique of maybe 5 people.
Yeah, it's cliques.
And it's not like they might call themselves like under the banner of an old gang, like say Black Pea Stones, like but they're fighting with another group that is also like Black Pea Stone or Gangster Disciple or whatever. They're not big, and although these gangs some of them they're involved in the trafficking of narcotics and other enterprises. A lot of that has fallen to the wayside. It isn't so much them doing that, and they're not money-making organizations.
Yeah, there's a distinct difference between how gangs were seen in the 90s as a organization, as large-scale organizations. Now they're kind of not dissimilar to how terrorism works. With terrorist groups, you have cells that are franchised off of a larger group type deal, like Al-Qaeda in Iraq is a franchise of Al-Qaeda. Now ISIS. That's kind of the structure, and like that's a very unique thing to me. It says something to me about that process of how law enforcement went about dealing with gangs, because they targeted the group as they understood it, and the group changed in order to make themselves more difficult to target, which is exactly how
they did too.
The prospect of the war on terror went. So like these things are adaptable organizations, but they're not necessarily the kinds of organizations that you're going to see forming the nucleus of an army.
No, not at all. Not only that, this might be a little bit controversial, but it's kind of like, like if we take, say the nucleus of a gang forming the nucleus of an army. It's kind of like, like the ridiculous, like, the Boogaloo Boys or Proud Boys or some of these other people forming the nucleus of a white militia army. It's kind of stupid because a lot of them are out of shape. I have the IRA, the Provisional IRA's handbook, and one of the quotes in there is, if you want to be a revolutionary, you have to keep your body in tip-top shape. And it talks about what is necessary to do that. There's no sign of any of that happening here on any level. And then when I look at the current gangs in Chicago, they're not people who, like, maybe like in the 90s, some of these guys were lifting weights. You don't really see that with these gangs in Chicago now.
Well,
A lot very thin,
I think a much more
malnourished, even, honestly.
I think while we come to that, a much more
Yeah.
problematic point is the view of these groups as forming some kind of army to overthrow the government just isn't going to happen.
No.
They don't
You have to
have
have
the things they need.
structure,
They
too.
don't have the logistical train, for example. Like, how are you going to feed people? Get them more bullets? Where are you going to keep all these things, etc.? All these questions they have, they don't really have an answer to it that doesn't end with getting a couple 155 millimeter round shells dropped in their heads. And that's the case. Like, if it comes to that, they lose. They're done. But this gets into
It depends. If it comes to that, there is the possibility of like sections of the army breaking off on political or ethnic lines. Things like that can happen.
they
The
can, but
issue is,
it's pretty
though, is like,
unlikely.
when it gets to that point, there's a lot of lead up to that. It just doesn't suddenly
Yes,
happen, really.
there's nothing that
There's a lot
indicates
of lead up to that.
there's
And
nothing that indicates a military fracture right now.
no, not even close, or not, um and as I said, I said at the beginning of this, I'm not going to say anything can't happen here, because it can. But you got to he Thomas Cheatham really thinks he's seeing the signs of it, and he's over he's just seeing what he wants to see. It's not really, this the what you look, you know what I mean? It's not what it has been happening over the last 30 years is not, in my mind, indicative of
Yes,
anything. And
and more to the point,
I
so
study these ethnic conflicts.
there is a format in which violence is happening now today that we understand and can explain, but it's a stochastic format. It's not organized. So
Yeah.
and like you brought this up, TK in chat, a little while ago, particularly relevant to the topic. I think it's of note that the standard reaction now to someone saying they're going to an LGBTQ event is to warn them of political violence. Yes, that's exactly it, because we do not have necessarily a model that predicts how that kind of violence happens. And it's kind of like a cup, right? You get this person who is a cup, and they get all this information telling them all these things. People are terrible. They're going to destroy the country. Blah 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 blah, etc. 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 And it just fills up, and they get more and more scared and terrified, and they feel that they need to take the power back, quote unquote. And then they go out and do a massive act of violence. Like, that's the model that you're looking at. It's not a great civil war and uprising. It's a bunch of little jackasses running around with their dad's gun, blowing holes in people. And I think that's really the shame too. Like you can write out this manifesto, but it's not really an accurate indication of what's happening.
No, it's not.
No, and Palm, here's the thing, man. The statistical odds are probably pretty good that you're going to be okay. But I don't want to tell anyone that, because statistics mean nothing to the individual. They meant nothing to the individual at Pulse. They mean nothing to those individuals in Colorado back a couple months ago. It happens, and there's no way to know when it happens. There's no way to say that you're safe. And I feel bad for people in that situation. Like
not far from where Daedalus and I grew up, and what's interesting is I saw no local coverage of this, but I saw this with, I mean, I didn't see the event happen, but I saw the aftermath of it. Not far from where we grew up is a church. It's like a Lutheran church, and I guess reverend or pastor is actually LGBT. He's actually and he has a husband. They put in front of the church as sort of a welcoming thing, love with like, you know, the rainbow colors. And I always notice that driving past because, you know, I'm thinking like, you know, that's especially around here, it's pretty, you know, surprising to see that. That's kind of nice. It's you know,
The town we
also
grew up in is
cold.
very Republican.
And I drove by and saw that someone must have like driven their car into it, must have hit it with a hammer, but they just demolished it. You could see that it was damaged, and now it's not there anymore. I'm hoping that they do put it back up, that it doesn't deter them. I mean,
I
from
hope they put a big steel rod in it so when they hit it with their car again, it breaks the radiator.
that would be excellent actually.
I
But
didn't say that out loud. Sorry. Just
yeah,
reinforce it really good. That's all. That's
put
terms of service
some
equipment.
rebar, a little bit of reinforced
No, not
concrete.
rebar. Just a vertical bar. So you smack into it and it breaks the crap out of your car, but it leaves the person intact.
Yeah, that would make more sense.
Walk
But
away with a little bit of a headache. Rebar is nasty, man. It gets in places like bodies.
that's why I had a piece of rebar in my car when I was driving.
Stop, stop, stop. Whatever you're about to say, don't say it.
Yeah, well, rebar can be a very, very useful tool.
Look, if you're looking for a
Um,
self-defense tool, guys, get a roll of quarters.
that's a good. I mean, anything that keeps some distance and that's hard.
No, a roll of
Um,
quarters. It adds considerable weight to your fist.
it does actually. Yeah. Um, I when I was in
Yeah, I
Ukraine,
see you're
I
talking
bought
about
really,
knives over here.
when I was in Ukraine, I bought these really, really cool gloves. Um, I really hope I brought them home. I hope that they're not. I have a significant portion of some of my stuff is in Ukraine, and I have to take on a mission to get that stuff back. I've been really putting off going there, but that's a whole different topic. But anyway, um, yeah, these gloves had they were basically like police or military gloves, that Ukrainian ones, and they had like a
Weights in the knuckles.
not weights, but like a silicone or something really hard. And if you hit someone with that, it's gonna enhance your punch quite a bit. And I would love those for here. And unfortunately, I think that they're in a war zone right now. Not necessarily, they're not in an area of a current war zone, but they were under siege. That that's surreal to think about. I have so much stuff that survived a siege, and yeah, a lot of my. I'm like one of the few people that can say, well, not few in the world, but few people here that can say that he left stuff in Ukraine that was in a city that was under siege. So, yeah, everything got quiet.
No, I'm not sure what to say. Um,
It's hard to respond to that
it
because
is.
I mean, oh man, we're having our next Ukrainian episode probably in a week or two to talk about this current state of the offensive. Hopefully, something good happens in that time.
Lots of little good things have happened.
Lots of little good things, but also lots of like lack of success and bad things have happened too. Um, I was never optimistic about the
I
offensive, but
know. To be fair, you're not actually optimistic about anything.
I used to be so optimistic, but
20 years
I don't
ago,
know. It's this. I mean, I don't know. It sucks. The war
it
has made
does.
me more pessimistic.
Getting back to Mr. Rhodesia over here.
Me? Oh no,
No,
Rhodesia,
him.
Thomas Cheatham. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes, Mr. Cheatham. I think that where we get to his central thesis, as much as you can call it that, is a very late chapter in the book, well, midway, I think, where he talks about the weakness of ethnic communities.
That just sounds like. Oh God!
I'm just
I pawned this book on you, and I don't even remember the last time I read it.
yes, I
And I
know you made me go through
had
this.
plenty of time to read
Not
it.
only did you make me
but
go
I
through this,
knew that it was
you made
going
me
to be.
postpone doing this show so that you could go on 17,000 dates.
Okay, what's better, going on dates or having to read some miserable fucking book?
I don't
And
know
I
the
mean,
answer to that question.
I mean, the dates didn't pan out that well. They weren't terrible, but didn't really.
Well done,
Nothing.
son. Anyway,
Yeah.
I'm just gonna come out and say it. This is bunk. This is absolute nonsense.
It is. We don't really want to give you. Well, we gave you the name at the beginning.
I'm not. Don't go
We're
read
not
this book.
encouraging you read this, but if you do want a little bit of like a what if Altus style laugh, although honestly, you're not going to come.
If you want
out
a
of
what
it.
if all this style laugh, just check out our previous streams.
Yeah. What I
Don't
am
read
surprised
this.
about though is, and actually it probably is a pleasant surprise. Two pleasant surprises. There isn't so much of an anti-Semitic bent in this book. I didn't see any of that. So I mean, I guess that's the one modicum of kudos I can give to Thomas Cheatham. He's but everything else, I mean, was with really bad intent. But it's very surprising that you don't see that, given the milieu that it came from.
No,
And
he's much more concerned with telling you what communities, white communities, have to be abandoned to black people when the war breaks out.
Yeah, he's kind of
By
like,
demographic.
Usually books like this say, and in the meantime, we have to focus our energy on a secret group of people controlling, an exorbitant amount of the world's wealth and all this other BS. So I mean, like, he doesn't do that. He really doesn't do that, and that is quite unique coming from that milieu. Not entirely unique because, I mean, if you look at like the Amran group, the person who started that, Jared Taylor,
Yeah.
he is not an anti-Semite at all. And in fact, actually, many of the people that he invited to Amran were very, very racist, Jewish. Some of them were high-level college professors. And yeah, some of their presentations were even more extreme than those of of the others. So maybe Thomas Cheatham comes from this sort of centrist
Slightly less
white
racist.
supremacy.
Yeah, yes. Slightly less racist than the next guy. That's the best thing you can say
but
about him.
But I mean, he's got a lot of credentials. I mean, he fought for the Rhodesian Army. The Rhodesian Army, to be
So he
fair,
fought with the
absolutely
American army in
fair to the
Vietnam
Rhodesian
and
Army.
the Rhodesian army in Rhodesia. So that's two losers.
Yeah, but I don't know, they weren't an army that was committing a ton of atrocities.
No,
as far as
just
I
really
know,
white supremacists.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. Ethnically diverse communities tend to be actually stronger over time because they understand better how to integrate with each other and get along. And I will die on this goddamn hill. I don't care how mad people get. The idea of culture is not to be hoarded or guarded. It's to be shared amongst each other and celebrated. I will die on this hill.
I think I did something similar to that.
Yes, that's what the point of multiculturalism is.
Yeah,
is to
essentially,
share in and celebrate each other.
I also believe that there should be efforts to preserve culture too.
Absolutely, and that's what sharing in and celebrating culture does.
I don't really like I don't like cosmopolitan cosmopolitization in some ways because of that, like, basically assimilation and things like that. But
There
when
are
you
especially
actually,
things I think that need protection. There are languages I think that need protection that have very few speakers. Uh, and like I think the problem with this languages especially is that the way that people get into academia is mostly by choice. So if someone doesn't feel compelled to preserve a thing, there's not impetus to do it, right?
yeah, and that should be, there should be an impetus. People should encourage that.
But like
And no, I agree. I agree with what you said
there's
100%.
nothing pure about any culture anywhere ever because all these
Yeah, like it's almost too, like, and I talk about this when I talk about like cuisine specifically, or music, like folk music. You generally, what you will see is sort of like kind of a continuum or wave. So for example, in Eastern Europe, you're going to see a lot of the variations of the same dish. So when you go to the Balkans, you're seeing they have that in Turkey too. They call it by the same name. Or when you go to the East Slavic countries, they eat borscht, although borscht is Ukrainian. Um, yeah, I said that. Um, but you see like the how geography influences, and then also the movement of people influences others. And people got along for a very long time. There was violence even in this period, but not to the extreme that you see it after the rise of, the idea of a nation state. You don't really
nationalism, I think, more than the nation state
nationalism.
itself,
Yeah,
is
that's what I mean. The rise
probably the
of
problem.
nationalism, or romantic nationalism. You don't really see, you see more. You don't see that level of division and sort of ethnic, like, identity conflict that you do, post nationalism. Um, and maybe it's good to sort of go back to that older model of
I don't
identity.
necessarily know if it's a case of going back. I think what happens is you'll find bumps along the road
Yeah,
where people have problems. But like, for example, let's rewind the clock to an ethnic conflict that we've talked about in the past, uh, Rwanda.
yeah,
So Rwanda, not that long ago, experienced a massive explosion of ethnic violence and a genocide occurred there. And this was a horrible thing. But Rwanda is doing fantastic comparatively now.
comparatively, yeah,
Like there's a real effort to do better, and it has a huge impact.
it
And it,
does. Yeah,
like it's a country that's in a lot of ways thriving more than it would have otherwise. And that's not to say that having the genocide was a good thing. But
no, the genocide didn't result in the progress that you see now. I think that
no, but the
a
efforts
lot
to
of
get
that
past
has
it
been,
did.
yeah, a
This
lot of that has
desire.
been, yeah, yeah, it is a desire to move past it. A lot of it, I mean, the president who's been president since, um, but post genocide, Paul Kagame has done. He is, I mean, you can call him what you want. There's not a real democracy necessarily in Rwanda, but he is a remarkably competent leader, and I think he had a very good ideas about how to, you know, recover from it.
Yes.
Um,
And
and
I think what I
they
want to
are
leave
doing
us with, because
well.
we're getting to the point tonight where we're trailing off too much. I think what
Yeah,
I want to leave us with is that example of Rwanda. Not necessarily that it was a good thing that it happened, but terrible things can happen, but can be overcome. We can get
they can
past
be
those
overcome
differences, and this model that Cheatham comes up with only works is if you hold on to your hatred.
100%, and it doesn't. that same model could have been applied. The Rwandan model probably could have been applied in, say, Bosnia, and it just wasn't. It's just not how things came together. And unfortunately, what you have is you kind of have that Cheatham model where these areas,
and
are now mono-ethnic. Unfortunately, you have that as well in, you have it to a large extent in the western areas of Ukraine. You don't have you don't have really the diverse tapestry of ethnic groups that were there before. To be fair, certain groups, say the Polish minority there, or even majority in some places, was expelled, and then much of the Jewish population that wasn't killed, even after the war, you do have a significant Jewish population in Ukraine, even in Western Ukraine. But as the ability for them to leave becomes there, and the economic situation deteriorates, most of them leave. They go to the United States, even Germany, believe it or not, and of course Israel. So those problems, that doesn't always by violence. Like that tapestry isn't always removed by violence. So, things change in other ways. But no, I agree with you. It's important to
the point the point I think I want to leave us with is that we can build better even in the wake of what was done in the past. You're not chained to the past. You're not chained to the conflicts of the past, and you're not chained to what happened before. So if you go and read this crappy book, just bear that in mind, that we know, because the world does get better, that we can make the world better, and that it's not inevitable that it's going to all fall into the war of us against them.
And also, I want to state too, just as a closing remark, there are few things worse than what happened in Rwanda. There are very few events in human history that are that terrible. And if a nation is able to overcome that, then it says a lot about the human spirit. Of course, we're simplifying things a little bit. There's more to the story with Rwanda, and there's a lot both Daedalus and I don't know about it. But that's a very good message to keep in mind. So anyway,
with that, we're gonna Hetman, stay afterwards. We're gonna do a song and an outro, but then we need to talk about something else real quick.
Okay.
It'll just be a quick one. I'm gonna sign you all off the monkey song. I want to thank you all and have a good night.
Take care, guys.
5 minutes, real quick. Promise it'll be fast. Like a